Welcome back to Mark Carney's book club, where I'm taking you through his whole book before the federal election on April 28th. In Chapter 7, we went through what caused the global financial crisis, and Chapter 8 is entitled Creating a Simpler, Safer, Fairer Financial System. Left off in Chapter 7 with the G20 deciding to backstop their financial systems. After that meeting, the G20 were empowered to lead the reform of the global financial system. It charged a new body called the Financial Stability Board, or the FSB, and it was tasked with making the financial system simpler, safer, and fairer. This new board reported directly to the G20 leaders, and Mark Carney was chair of the FSB from 2011 to 2018. When it was first created, there was a different chair, but he took over after a couple of years. And during the time, the 2011 to 2018, he was governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. The FSB knew that they had to rebalance the relationships between banks and markets, between the market and the state, and between economic and social capital. The consequences of this crisis were severe. He goes over three of them, the first being a complete lost decade. The second consequence was growing fragmentation of the global economic system, which the third wave of globalization crested with the financial crisis. And the third consequence was growing mistrust of the elites. He says the financial crisis was arguably one of the main causes of the market decline in trust in experts. A financial system lauded by most economists and policymakers, as well as by all bankers, came crashing down on the heads of ordinary people, some of whom are still suffering the consequences. They, like Queen Elizabeth, wondered, why did no one notice it? The answer, according to a letter addressed to Her Majesty and signed by 33 distinguished economists, was a failure of the collective imagination of many bright people, both in this country and internationally, to understand the risks to the system as a whole. Over the next decade, the Financial Stability Board would develop a comprehensive program of over 120 reforms. And though no country must implement any new reform, it is in the interests of all that they do so, since financial risk easily spills across borders. He then is going to go in to talk about the three lies of finance. A major bank CEO once told his daughter a financial crisis is something that happens every 5 to 7 years. In no other aspect of human endeavor do people not strive to learn and improve, and in no other industry would such weary fatalism be tolerated. This depressing cycle of prudence, confidence, complacency, euphoria, and despair reflects the power of the three lies of finance. This time is different, markets always clear, and markets are moral. To break their seductive power, we need to reinforce the underlying values required for the financial system to fulfill its role as a servant rather than master of society. We'll get more deep into the first lie. This time is different in the second part. The second lie is that markets always clear, and that implies that the supply of whatever is traded will always equal demand for it and at the right price. There will never be excess supply or demand, and of course, markets only clear in textbooks. The third lie is that markets are moral. What Carney has to say about that is as follows. Repeated episodes of misconduct in the run-up to the global financial crisis, including the LIBOR and FX scandals, called into question the social license that markets need to innovate and grow. Financial market participants were found to have knowingly sold products that were inappropriate for their clients or even fraudulent. Professionals across firms manipulated key interest rate and foreign exchange benchmarks to support trading positions within their firms while costing retail and corporate clients who relied on those benchmarks billions. One of the most striking things about the transcripts of the chat room discussions that orchestrated these outrages is how detached they were from those businesses and households in the real world which they were affecting. The scale of misconduct impaired banks' ability to function fairly and effectively. A decade after the crisis, global banks' misconduct costs had exceeded $320 billion, capital that could otherwise have supported around $5 trillion of lending to households and businesses. And in a system where trust is fundamental, only 20% of UK citizens thought banks were run well after the crisis, compared to 90% in the 1980s. The global financial crisis reminded us that real markets don't just happen. They depend on the quality of market infrastructure for their effectiveness, resilience, and fairness. That means both hard infrastructure, the structure of markets themselves, such as the design of financial market benchmarks, and soft infrastructure, like regulations, codes, and culture that govern behavior in them. He's now going to talk about the consequences of markets that don't always clear, and states that there has been major reforms to make markets less complex and more robust, with an objective of rebuilding real markets which are resilient, fair, and effective. Real markets depend on the quality of market infrastructure. Robust market infrastructure is a public good in constant danger of under-provision, not least because the best markets innovate continually. This risk can be overcome only if all market actors, public and private, recognize their responsibilities for the system as a whole. Says that reforms have made the derivative market safer and more transparent by requiring trade reporting and encouraging central clearing of trades. A series of measures are eliminating the toxic forms of shadow banking. However, a major new vulnerability has emerged across the G20. Global assets under management have grown from 50 trillion to 90 trillion in the past decade, bringing welcome diversity to the financial system. However, more than $30 trillion of assets are held in funds that promise daily liquidity to investors, despite investing in potentially illiquid underlying assets. This liquidity mismatch creates an advantage to investors who redeem ahead of others, particularly in stress. This first mover advantage could prompt a destabilizing rush for the exits, not only in the market where problems first occur, but also across markets with analogous risks. Fund suspensions, a widely available tool, exacerbate the issue. In other words, these investment vehicles are built on the lie that markets always clear. I'm going to stop there. I'll give you one more part for this chapter. Chapter 8 of creating a simpler, safer, and fairer financial system. Follow along and let me know what you think of this chapter so far.